Hey guys, so I went to China a few years ago and I want to tell you guys about a few things that most people don't know about China. So China is kind of like on the opposite side of the earth, and therefore the cultures and norms and a lot of things that occur there are oftentimes a lot different from here. It can be quite a culture shock. The first is that there is a 12-hour time difference, which means night is day and day is night, which means your 9 a.m. is their 9 p.m. And therefore, once you get there, you will experience some crazy jet lag, and then you'll have to reverse your entire sleeping schedule. The second big thing was the mosquitoes. So apparently there's tons of mosquitoes everywhere, and basically you have to cover your bed with a veil if you can afford one, to keep the mosquitoes out when you're sleeping. Also, they sell a lot of these things there that I like to call electric tennis rackets, and it's basically how it sounds. You put in batteries and you could turn it on, and the wire inside the tennis racket is electrified. So literally what you do with it is you hunt mosquitoes and then you zap it in the air. And it seems fun and stuff, but then it becomes a bit of a chore and a hassle, because now you have to get all these creepy mosquitoes that you see flying around really quickly. And if you don't get them all, then you can't go to sleep. Sometimes there's up to 20 or 25 hanging around. You have to spend all this time zapping them. And then if you know you don't get them, you're gonna wake up with a bunch of bites. The next big thing, and I learned this pretty early on, was the difference in plumbing. So they had a lot of holes in the grounds when I went to the bathroom. Literally you would go to the bathroom and it seemed pretty normal. Then you'd open up a stall and you realize there's no toilet there. It's like a dirt hole in the ground. Now most likely it's gotten a lot better since then. But when I went, even when you went to the restaurants, even when you went to like a fancy restaurant, once you went to the bathroom, there would be like porcelain holes in the ground, which isn't that bad, but it's really quite a strain on your legs. And the stench is just like too much. And then if you really get super tired, it just sucks and your legs are just straining, and it's just a whole mess. And on top of that, what you learn is that you cannot flush toilet paper down into the toilet. What you have to do is, when you're taking a number two, you have to literally wipe your bum and then throw the used toilet paper into the trash can. The next thing is that, especially in major cities, the traffic is just ridiculous. Probably worse than LA traffic, because there's just so many cars. And there's a lot of bicyclists as well, but the sheer amount of cars is just ridiculous. And on top of that, and here's the craziest part, the amount of reckless driving is just obscene. Like, these people don't care, and everyone's just driving so recklessly, and they're very, very aggressive. And horns are so commonplace. Like, you cannot go even a few seconds without hearing constant horns. Like literally their standard is horn honking. They honk horns for everything, and it's gotten so common. When I went back to the States, it was so different, because I stayed in China for over a month and I had gotten kind of used to the norm. And so, because when I looked on the roads, they just seemed so empty, and everywhere just seems so empty. And when Americans would hear one horn, they'd just be like, oh, that guy's so rude. But in China, it's like the most common thing ever. In addition to that, when you're taking a taxi or you look at the type of cars on the road, sure, there's a lot of expensive cars, there's a lot of rich people there, and there's a lot, but also there's a lot of really crappy cars, and the standard of crappy cars is much worse than that of American cars. And again, the amount of aggressive, reckless driving and car crashes and the amount of car crashes and car accidents that occur on a daily basis is just staggering. And I can only assume that's getting worse. There's literally a case where we were on the highway and we were in the fastest lane and we were going 70, maybe 80 miles per hour, and some car had broken down on that lane in the highway, and it had literally stopped there. And the guy literally got out and started working on the car, and we literally had to hit our brakes really hard to stop. and then drive around, and we almost crashed into that guy. And that sort of stuff is commonplace. And we looked around, and all the cars after us were doing the same thing, just like so surprised. The next big thing is probably the amount of crowdedness in China. Like literally everything is so freaking crowded. Everywhere we would go, there'd just be like tons and tons of people. If you went to the supermarket, if you went to buy fast food, if you went anywhere, it was just packed to the brim, to the point where sometimes you couldn't even get a seat to eat. Like you would literally go into a KFC or McDonald's and there would be a line there, and literally people would be standing or they would be fighting to get a seat. And to this day, I haven't seen that even come close to occurring in America. And this was my trip. Which brings us to the next big thing, which is the sheer amount of which brings us to the next thing, which is that there is a decent amount of American products and brands in China. The biggest of which were McDonald's and KFC. And Pizza Hut, I guess, too. KFC was far more prevalent than McDonald's. Like literally every few blocks you would see a KFC. And obviously they catered and changed their menus to suit the customs more so of the people there. Don't get me wrong, there is still some of the normal stuff like the Big Mac, but they also had Chinese style stuff like rice soup, which is a custom and norm for all Chinese people. And then for KFC, it was weird because they didn't serve fried chicken. Like that wasn't their main thing. Their main thing was this like crispy chicken sandwich. And personally, I like the Chinese menu a lot more. The KFCs in China are literally like a chicken / hamburger place. Like fried chicken is not their main thing at all. I don't even think it was on the menu there. No one even ordered that thing. If it was, no one ordered it. The next big thing was just the culture shock of seeing a lot of poverty and a lot of crappy structures and architectures, and at the same time seeing a lot of prosperity in the form of all these buildings being constructed everywhere you went, and every day more and more stuff was being built. It was kind of weird. And it would, it wouldn't be like the most spectacular thing ever. Some of it was really good and fairly nice, but oftentimes it was very reminiscent of certain areas of America. You had the grimy apartments, you had sketchy people sitting outside, poor people on the streets, poor people pushing shopping carts. You saw a lot of homeless people collecting used water bottles, and then they would sell it to the recycling company and make some money off of that. This was especially prevalent in the big touristy areas. One of them actually literally came up to me and asked for my bottle. Which brings us to the next big thing, which is that water bottle and water is huge there. In America, water is kind of like taken for granted, but it's really not. It's like a limited resource. It's funny because I was actually listening to this audiobook by T. Boone Pickens. He's a billionaire and he's like an energy guy. And in one of his last chapters, he talks about water and how it's going to become more and more scarce. And yet so many people don't realize it and they take it for granted. But he says if you look at the numbers, it's very clear that this stuff is going to get more and more scarce and more valuable over time. And the standard for tap water and purification is nowhere near as good as it is in America, and therefore the tap water that comes out of the sink is unpurified and unsafe, and therefore you have to boil it and go through this whole process before you can drink it, and therefore it's on a much lesser supply, and then it has a different mentality behind it. And so the point of it was that water fountains and free public water fountains really wasn't a thing, and therefore you had to buy water and then conserve it, and then when you're traveling you had to get more. and it got pretty expensive, so you really had to save it. So it's this big issue. And then on top of that, like literally you see like everyone, and on top of that, literally you go everywhere and you see people drinking bottled water and throwing it away, and there's like tons and tons of bottled water, and then cans of bottled water everywhere. Which gets us into the next thing, which are trinkets. There's a bunch of these like gimmicky trinkets that they sell everywhere, and you see it on the streets, and they're always trying to sell it to you, especially in the touristy areas. It's like stupid small stuff like weird like bracelets or little toys that are like the fads of the day, and they're doing all this stuff and trying to sell it to you, and it seems pretty cheap, and they're telling you it's really cheap if you buy all these bracelets. And for a European foreigner, it usually is. So I've seen a few European foreigners come in and they're like, oh my goodness, all this stuff is pretty cheap. But you can just tell by looking at the eyes of the people there, like this stuff is like literally, they're literally like, you can just tell that it's for them, they're making a good buck off of you, and they're probably ripping you off to a certain extent because they're buying it for a fraction of the price they're selling it to you at. Which gets us to the next thing, haggling and selling. So basically there's no like set price there. It's a lot of like haggling and bargaining, and it's kind of a skill to do that right. If not, you're probably gonna get ripped off to a certain extent. So a lot of tourists don't know this, which is kind of a bit of a problem. But where they're from, there's a lot of haggling going on, and basically you don't just go there and there's a price and then you just buy something, but you literally have to bargain with them and fight, and then like get the best price possible. I think, you know, initially for me, I went in thinking, yeah, this is kind of fun, but then you realize like this is like real stuff. Like these people, some of them are willing to manipulate, cheat, do whatever they need to in order to get the most money out of you. Like this is literally their livelihood. I guess for like a seasoned entrepreneur or like a natural born salesperson, it still could be a lot of fun for you. So I don't know, try it out for you. There are a lot of ways where you could be spending a lot more money than you need to for certain things, especially if you're a tourist. I came and went with people who were Chinese and knew Chinese, and yet they were still kind of scammed in a way. And the reason is because we went on this big tour thing that we paid for, and they dropped us off at this spot where it was this big old tourist merchandise shop, and literally there were people there, and they would show us all these pieces of jewelry and all this other stuff. And so my Chinese was not good at that point, so I may be butchering the story, and this may just be my perspective. It could have happened a different way completely. But what I remember occurred, and it could be wrong,